I still remember the day my life changed forever. It was an autumn morning in Rochester, New York, as the leaves on Lake Ontario were turning a brilliant shade of gold. I, Victor Hale, 55, walked into the office of Veltria Housing, where I had spent the last 18 years building something from scratch. I had turned an antiquated technology system into a modern property management machine that ran like a Swiss watch. But as I sat across from Graham Vickers, the brand new CTO, I heard a line that made my blood stop. "We could hire 3 young engineers for your salary." He smirked, as if my 18 years were just a number on a balance sheet. This wasn't a story about revenge. This was a story about proving my worth, about how experience and dedication could trump foolish short-term decisions. And I promise you, if you stick with me until the end of this video, you'll see why sometimes other people's failures are your greatest victories. Let me take you back to that time. I started at Veltria Housing, then known as Bayview Properties, in the early 2000s. It was a small operation with 4 apartment complexes and a cramped office. Their technology: 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, and a slow dial-up internet connection. Harold Bay. My boss plucked me from a consulting job in Syracuse with the promise, "Victor, we're expanding, and I need someone who can build something solid." I did just that. For 18 years, I had built an integrated property management system that handled everything from rental applications to background checks to automated maintenance requests and rent collection across 63 apartment complexes in 4 states. I had written thousands of lines of code, designed layers of hidden security, and built redundant systems that no one on the board had ever considered. They just saw it work, and they took it for granted. But then, things changed. 5 years ago, Harold retired, and his son Justin sold the company to a private equity firm. They renamed it Veltria Housing, bringing in a new crop of executives with shiny MBAs and dreams of modernization. I began to see warning signs. At first, they rejected my proposal to create a team to document the system. "It's too expensive," they said. "We'll see about it next quarter." That quarter never came. Then they started hiring young consultants who talked about disruption and cloud solutions, but didn't understand the custom system I had built. I tried to explain it, showing them the proprietary code, the complex connections, but they just looked at me blankly. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to planning meeting. My wife Elaine saw this before I did. One night, over dinner at home in Rochester, she said, "Victor, they're trying to push you out. You need to prepare." I brushed it off. "They need me," I said. "No one else understands how this system works." Elaine looked at me, her eyes full of concern. That could be the problem. 6 months before I was fired, Graham Vickers was hired as CTO. He came from a banking software company, dressed smartly, wearing designer glasses and talking about standardization and replacing the old system. He brought in 3 young engineers fresh out of college to learn from me. I answered all their questions, but I knew they couldn't grasp the complexity of the system. How could they? It had taken me years to build it, to understand every connection, to create layers of redundancy that kept everything running smoothly. But Graham didn't care. He only saw the cost, namely, my salary. The day I was fired, Graham called me into a quarterly review meeting. I walked into the meeting room and saw Diane from HR sitting there with a file. Graham said bluntly, "Victor, this is a cost issue. We can hire 3 engineers for your salary. Nothing personal, just cost cutting." Diane pushed the file toward me. 2 months severance pay and accrued vacation time. I nodded, took the file, and said thanks. Graham looked disappointed. He wanted me to argue, to make a scene, so he could tell the board I was difficult to work with. But I didn't. I just felt done. I packed up my desk. 18 years of work packed into a cardboard box. As I left the building, my phone rang. A text from Alan, the database administrator I'd hired 12 years earlier. "Vic, the team is freaking out." I didn't answer. Back home, I sat on my porch looking out at Lake Ontario, sipping a glass of bourbon. Elaine put her hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do now?" I shrugged. "Something will come up." But deep down, I knew what Graham didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to find out. I wasn't just building V's system. Veltria. I had written the code for most of it with little documentation. I was the only one who understood the hidden layers of security, the complex backup systems, and the intricate network architecture, and I had no intention of explaining it to anyone. 2 weeks later, my phone started ringing. Graham called, leaving a voicemail. "Victor, we're having trouble with the customer portal. The young team is trying, but they don't understand your code architecture. Can you call back?" I deleted the message. That same day, 3 more calls came in, each more desperate. Alan texted systems down all day. Maintenance requests not being processed. Graham is going crazy. The next morning, Diane called, offering a temporary consulting contract at a good rate. "How good? $300 an hour. 4 hours minimum," she said. "I'll think about it," I said. But I knew I wouldn't. I sat at the kitchen table looking out at the lake, thinking about my worth. Elaine brought me a cup of coffee. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I think they're realizing how much I'm worth," I said. Over the next 3 days, the calls increased. Graham, Diane, even Justin, Bay Herald's son, who was still on the board, called. The customer portal went down. The maintenance scheduling system crashed. Automatic payment processing failed, affecting thousands of residents. I didn't respond to anyone. Then an opportunity came along. An email from Devlin Systems, a Veltria competitor, came from the Chief Technology Officer, Lawrence Devlin. "Victor," he wrote, "I heard about your situation at Veltria. We've always admired your work. Would you like to discuss the opportunity with us?" I responded immediately and set up a meeting for the next day. That evening, as Elaine and I were making dinner, the doorbell rang. Graham Vickers stood there, his glasses askew, his usual sharp suit always wrinkled. "Victor, I apologize for coming in unexpectedly, but we have an emergency. The system is completely down. The team doesn't know how to fix it. The board has authorized me to pay you $5 an hour, whatever you want." I leaned against the doorframe, thinking about the cardboard box in the garage, about the 18 years of nothing personal. "I'm sorry to hear about your troubles," I said, "but I have an interview tomorrow. Something will come up." I closed the door, went back to making dinner, and for the first time since I'd been fired, I felt at peace. The interview with Lawrence Devlin went better than I'd expected. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Rochester. "Victor Lawrence said the integrated property management system you built at Veltria is legendary in the industry. No one else has anything like it. He offered me the job of Director of Systems Architecture, with full benefits stock, and a salary 20% higher than Veltria's." "Why me?" I asked. "There are younger, cheaper engineers." Lawrence laughed. "We tried that. Hire 3 talented young engineers, they build something state-of-the-art that crashes every time it gets more than 100 concurrent users. We don't need to be cheap. We need to be reliable." I accepted. Meanwhile, things at Veltria were getting worse. Alan texted an update. The system was only partially restored. Critical functions were still down. They hired an expensive consulting firm to restore the old system, but it didn't work. A week after I started at Devlin, Graham called, almost pleading. "Victor, we've lost access to our billing records for the past 3 months. Clients are complaining about incorrect charges. The consulting firm needs you to explain the database structure." "Graham," I replied, "I'm under an exclusive contract with Devlin. I can't help." He tried to entice. "We'll pay you double what they're paying just for 2 days. "It's not about the money," I said, "so this is revenge. You enjoy watching us struggle." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "No, Graham. I don't enjoy it, but you made a business decision. You thought my experience wasn't worth it. Now you see what that means." He turned to threats. "There could be legal issues if we find out you're deliberately making the system difficult to maintain." The non-compete clause. The intellectual property, I replied calmly. The system is exactly as it was when the company repeatedly refused my requests for documentation. Every line of code belongs to Veltria. I'm not taking anything but my experience. Let your lawyer contact me. I hung up my hands, shaking a little not from fear, but from anger. The accusation of sabotage was the last straw. At Devlin, I started from scratch with full documentation training for the engineering team and backup systems to avoid a disaster like Veltria. I didn't look back, and I didn't help them. There are lessons that can only be learned through failure. To make this story more vivid, let me tell you about a friend of mine, Tom, a civil engineer in Buffalo. Tom worked for 22 years for a large construction company, designing sustainable bridges. All over New York. But last year, the company was acquired, and the board decided to replace him with younger engineers to save money. The result? A major bridge project was delayed because of a design flaw that only Tom could have spotted early on. The company lost millions of dollars and eventually begged Tom to come back as a consultant. He refused, opting to work for a smaller firm where he was valued. Tom's story is similar to mine. It shows how companies often don't realize the value of experience until it costs them. Back to my story. A month after I joined Devlin, Alan came to my new office. We had lunch at a nearby diner, and he told me about the chaos at Veltria. They lost 3 years of historical data, he said. The backup system was corrupted because someone didn't follow security protocols. I wasn't surprised. I had designed a backup system with multiple layers of protection, one step missed, and the whole thing failed to protect client data. Alan revealed that he had discovered emails between Graham and the board, planning to fire me months in advance. Graham had convinced them that my system was too complicated and could be replaced with a cheaper solution that would save over $1 million a year. In fact, he had been hired to cut costs and clean up the books before the hedge fund sold Veltria. I quit yesterday, Alan added. Half the IT team is gone. The consulting firm is predicting it will take 6 months to get the system back up, maybe longer. He paused, then smiled. By the way, are Devlin hiring database administrators? I introduced Alan to Lawrence, and he got the job. The big opportunity came sooner than I thought. 2 months after I joined Devlin, Lawrence called me into his office. Jeffrey Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Properties, just called. They've terminated their contract with Veltria and want to know if we can manage their portfolio. Westbrook, which manages more than 10,000 apartments, would double Devlin's size. We're not ready, I said. The system is only half done. Lawrence asked, what would it take to be ready? I listed 3 senior engineers, dedicated server infrastructure, and 8 weeks of development. Jeffrey agreed to 12 weeks and infrastructure expansion funding. I barely slept that night, sketching out system diagrams, planning data migrations, considering scaling challenges. The next morning, I presented a plan, a phased approach starting with 2,000 apartments in western New York. Most importantly, I emphasized full documentation, so no one would be a single point of failure. Lawrence agreed, and we began. Alan built a database migration tool. I designed a scalable modular architecture. We hired 5 more engineers, including 2 who had just left Veltria. In the middle of the project, I got an email from Justin Bay, who was still on the Veltria board. He apologized for letting me go and invited me back. I didn't respond. 10 weeks later, we were ready for the first deployment. Jeffrey Westbrook came into the office, shook my hand. Lawrence said you built something that wouldn't fall apart every time we added a new apartment complex, he said. I nodded. That's the plan. On deployment day, I stood in Devlin's server room watching the engineers work. The data from 2,000 apartments migrated smoothly. No errors, no interruptions. The first phase was a success, and the rest of the Westbrook portfolio followed. But the story wasn't over. Lawrence revealed that Devlin was considering buying Veltria for a significant discount. If the deal went through, they wanted me to lead the integration, combining the best of Veltria's legacy systems with our new architecture. I agreed, but on one condition: everything had to be done right. Full documentation, thorough training, no shortcuts. Lawrence agreed. 6 months later, the deal was done. I stood in the lobby of Veltria's old headquarters, now called Devlin Integrated Property Management. Many of the old employees remained, some looking at me sheepishly, some smiling with relief. Graham was gone along with most of the board that had approved my dismissal. In the conference room, I told the staff about the integration plan time support, and a commitment that no one would be left behind to cut corners. A year later, Devlin was the largest property management company in the Northeast. The new system I designed works perfectly, is well documented, and is run by a highly trained team. But I want you to know this: my victory is not watching Veltria fall. My victory is building something better, something more sustainable. I asked Lawrence to create an engineering education division, training the next generation of engineers not just how to code, but how to build things that last. That division launches next quarter, and I will lead it. As I stood in the lobby of Devlin Integrated Property Management, looking at the familiar faces from Veltria, I thought my story had been told. The end. The new system was running smoothly, the technical education department was about to launch, and I had proven my worth. But life, as you know, has a way of surprising you. And what happened next was not just a twist, but a real storm, one that brought both me and those who had underestimated me to face bitter truths. One Tuesday morning, as I was checking the progress of the new system in my Rochester office, Alan walked in his face, as pale as if he had seen a ghost. "Victor," he whispered, "you need to see this." He handed me an old USB drive, the kind used in the early 2000s, with a faded sticker that read, "Backup Data. Veltria." "I found it in a junk box in the basement of the old HQ," Alan said. "I think it might contain something important." I plugged the drive into my laptop, and what appeared made my heart pound. It was a repository of source code. Not just my code, but also digital handwritten notes I'd written in my early days at Bayview Properties. But what was more shocking was a hidden folder labeled Plan for Sale of the Company, 2020. I opened it, and a series of emails, documents, and spreadsheets emerged, revealing a plot that even I, with 18 years at Veltria, had not seen coming. It turned out that the private equity fund that had bought Veltria 5 years earlier had not simply wanted to modernize the company. They had planned from the beginning to strip the company of everything of value and sell it for the highest possible price. Emails between senior executives and Graham Vickers showed that they had targeted me from the moment Graham was hired. One email from a board member read, "Hale is the biggest risk. His system is too complex, and he's the only one who understands it. We need to get rid of him to simplify before selling." Another document listed unnecessary expenses with my name at the top of the list with a note: "Replace with low-cost engineers, move to commercial software within 6 months." But what shocked me most was an internal memo proposing to deliberately let my system crash after I left, blaming outdated infrastructure and justifying a sale of the company for a lower price to a pre-selected partner, a company that, according to the document, was affiliated with the hedge fund itself. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like the ground was falling out from under me. 18 years of service were not just seen as too expensive, but as part of a larger game in which my team and I were mere pawns. Elaine, when I told her that night, held my hand tightly. "Victor," she said, "they didn't just fire you. They deliberately destroyed what you built for their own gain." I nodded, but inside a fire was burning. I didn't just want to prove my worth anymore. I wanted justice. I brought the USB to Lawrence the next morning. He looked through the documents, his brow furrowed. "This is evidence of fraud," he said. "If these documents are real, the hedge fund and Graham manipulated Veltria for their own gain. But we need to be careful. They have money and good lawyers. I agreed, but I also said, Lawrence, I don't want to let this go. Not for me, but for all the people like Alan who lost their jobs because of their game. Lawrence nodded. Let me contact our legal team, but Victor, if we do this, you're going to be the focus. They're going to come after you, bring up your past. I smiled faintly. They've already taken 18 years of my life. What else can they take? While Devlin's legal team was investigating another event, shook things up. One afternoon, while I was meeting with the engineering team about the Westbrook project, my phone rang. It was Justin Bay, the son of Harold, who used to own Bayview Properties. Vickers, he said, his voice shaking. I need to see you. Something big. We met at a small bar on Lake Ontario, where older Rochesterians often gathered to drink beer and tell stories about the old days. Justin, usually immaculately dressed, looked haggard, his hair disheveled, his eyes dark. I just found something, he said, sliding a stack of documents across the table. My dad kept old backups of the system from before the sale, and I found something strange. I flipped through the documents. There were contracts and emails from Harold's time as CEO, but one page stopped me, a subcontract signed by a hedge fund subsidiary, authorizing Graham Vickers to oversee a technical restructuring of Veltria with a huge bonus if the company sold before 25. But the shocker was the second signature on the contract, Diane, the person from HR, who had been sitting in the room when I was fired. It turned out she wasn't just an innocent admin staffer. She was part of the scheme paid to oversee the firing of veteran employees, including me. Justin, I said, trying to keep calm. Why are you telling me that? What about this, now? He looked out at the lake, his eyes distant. Because my father was right. He said firing you was the biggest mistake the company ever made. I didn't realize how dirty they were until I saw this. I want to make it right, Victor. I want to help you. I nodded, but inside I knew this was more than just making it right. This was a fight. I gave Justin's documents to Lawrence and Devlin's legal team, began building a case against the hedge fund and the individuals involved, including Graham and Diane. But before we could act, another twist occurred. One morning, when I arrived at the office, I found a crowd of reporters gathered outside Devlin headquarters. An article from the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle had been posted online, headlined, Former Veltria Engineer Accused of Sabotaging Systems Before Leaving. The article, based on anonymous sources from Veltria, claimed that I had deliberately designed the system to collapse without me, and that I had stolen the source code when I left. I stood there, reading the article on my phone, feeling like I had been punched in the face. They hadn't just fired me. They hadn't just manipulated the company. Now, they were trying to smear my reputation. Lawrence called me into his office immediately. Victor, this is dirty tactics, he said. They know we have something against them, and they're trying to strike first. Do you want to back down? I shook my head. No, Lawrence. I've let them control the narrative for too long. It's time for me to take it back. We held a press conference the next day where I went public with my story. I told of my 18 years of dedication, of how I begged to document the system of the emails and documents that proved the hedge fund's conspiracy. I didn't name Graham or Diane, but I made it clear I didn't sabotage anything. I built something trustworthy, and people who didn't understand it destroyed it. The video of the press conference went viral on social media, especially on X, where older users who had been undervalued in their jobs began sharing my story. This is why you can't replace experience with cheap promises, one wrote. Another posted, Victor Hale is a hero for older workers. But the story didn't end there. A week after the press conference, I got a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, a familiar voice rang out, Graham Vickers. Victor, he said, his voice shaking. You need to stop. You don't know who you're dealing with. I chuckled. Graham, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I'm not afraid. He turned threatening. I can destroy you. I have proof that you breached your contract, that you took Veltria's data. I replied coldly. Graham, you should worry about yourself. Those emails on the USB dongle don't just have your name on them. They have the signatures of people above you. He fell silent, then hung up. I could tell he was panicking, and I could tell we were getting closer to the truth. Meanwhile, the Westbrook project continued to move forward, but a new problem arose. One of the younger engineers from Veltria who had joined Devlin accidentally leaked part of our new source code to an online technical forum. Although unintentional, the incident led a smaller competitor, Crestwood Properties, to begin copying some of our system's features. Lawrence was furious, but I saw an opportunity. Let them copy, I said. They don't have the documentation, they don't have the team to understand the system. They'll fail just like Veltria. And just as I predicted, Crestwood's system collapsed within a month, costing them a major contract. Word spread, and Devlin was hailed as having the most reliable property management system in the area. But the biggest twist came one rainy afternoon, when I received an email from a lawyer representing Harold Bay, the founder of Bayview Properties. Harold, now 78, and living in Florida, had followed my story through the press. The email read, Victor, I always knew you were the heart of the company. I'd like to meet with you to discuss something I've been holding on to for a long time. I flew to Florida the following week and met Harold at a small beach house. He was frailer than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. Victor, he said, handing me an old metal box. I've had this since I sold the company. I don't trust hedge funds, so I keep a copy of everything, the source code, the contracts, and the stuff they don't want anyone to know. I opened the box, and inside were dozens of CDs and hard drives, along with a notebook handwritten by Harold. The notebook recorded secret meetings between the hedge fund and some of the board members, where they discussed deliberately undervaluing Veltria in order to buy it cheaper through a shell company. I don't have the power to fight them, Harold said, but you do. Use this, Victor. Take back what's yours. I hugged him, feeling like I'd found a lost part of my family. Back in Rochester, I gave the data to the legal team, determined that Harold's documents, combined with Alan's thumb drive and Justin's contract, were sufficient to sue the hedge fund for fraud and market manipulation. The lawsuit was filed the following month, and it made headlines across New York. Newspapers called it the biggest real estate scandal in the area in a decade. Graham and Diane were called to testify, and both began blaming each other, revealing more details about their scheme. Meanwhile, I continued my work at Devlin, making sure our system not only worked, but became the gold standard in the industry. But one final surprise awaited. One morning, when I arrived at the office, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a letter from Jeffrey Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Properties. Victor, he wrote, your system saved our reputation. But more than that, your story inspired me. I would like to ask you to join the board of Westbrook, not just in a technical capacity, but as someone who shapes our future. I read the letter, feeling like things had come full circle. I had gone from being a fired engineer to being invited into a position of power, not because I fought for revenge, but because I never stopped building. I hadn't responded to Jeffrey yet. I wanted to take some time to talk to Elaine, and maybe drive along Lake Ontario and watch the leaves fall. But one thing I knew for sure, this story wasn't about me winning or Veltria losing. It was about standing up even when the world said you were worthless. And I promise you, if you stick around, I'll tell you more about what happened next. Because trust me, this story isn't over yet. Just when I thought my story had reached its climax, with the lawsuit against the hedge fund and Westbrook's board appointment, life proved once again that it can always surprise me. What happened next wasn't just a new chapter, but a series of events that shook Rochester, drawing me into a web of drama, betrayal, and secrets deeper than I could have ever imagined. Stay with me, folks, because this story is about to get even more dramatic, and I promise the twists ahead will keep you glued to your seats. After Devlin's legal team filed their lawsuit, Rochester was on tenterhooks. News of the Veltria scandal was splashed across the Democrat and Chronicle and local television. Older Lake Ontario residents who had worked their lives to build something began to gather in coffee shops talking about my story. Victor Hale, they said, is proof that you can't replace experience with empty promises. But while I was seen as a hero on some streets, on others, I became a target. And this time the enemy wasn't just Graham Vickers or Diane from HR. It was a bigger force lurking in the shadows. One rainy evening, as I drove home along the Lake Ontario coast, my phone buzzed. A text message from an anonymous number. "Drop the lawsuit, Hale. You don't know who you're messing with." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. It wasn't the first time I'd been threatened, but there was something different about this one. The tone was cold, almost professional. I called Lawrence right away, told him about the message. "Victor," he said, "the legal team has just uncovered something else. The investment fund that owns Veltria is linked to an international real estate company, Global Nexus. They don't just want to sell Veltria, they're trying to control the entire Northeast real estate market." I was stunned. It turned out that Veltria was just one piece in a larger scheme, and I, with this lawsuit, had unwittingly become a thorn in the side of a giant. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to dig deeper. Alan, with his database administration skills, had hacked completely legally. I swear into some of Veltria's old servers that Devlin had taken over after the acquisition. He found a trove of encrypted documents hidden in a partition I had never known existed, even when I worked at Veltria. After a few hours of decryption, we uncovered a series of suspicious financial transactions. Millions of dollars transferred from Veltria's accounts to offshore shell companies, all approved by a name I'd never heard of, Margaret Hensley. "Who is she?" I asked Alan. He shook his head. "Not on the employee list. But she shows up in Graham's emails as someone giving him orders." I handed the information over to the legal team and they began to track it down. It turned out that Margaret Hensley was the secretive CEO of Global Nexus, a powerful figure who operated in the shadows, never making public appearances. She was rumored to be behind a series of real estate acquisitions in the United States, using companies like Veltria as fronts to market manipulation. Our lawsuit, with evidence from Alan's USB, Justin's documents, and Harold's archives, threatened to unravel her entire network. Victor Lawrence said in an emergency meeting, "If we go forward, we're not just fighting a hedge fund, we're fighting an empire. Are you sure you want to continue?" I looked at him, thinking about the 18 years I'd poured into Veltria, about the sleepless nights coding, about the cardboard box in the garage. "Lawrence," I said, "I'm not stopping. Not now." But the drama didn't end there. One afternoon, while I was working in Devlin's server room, a security guard knocked on the door. "Mr. Hale, someone wants to see you. She says it's urgent." I stepped out into the lobby and was stunned to see Diane. The same Diane from Veltria's Human Resources Department who'd handed me the termination paperwork. She looked different, no longer the confident office worker. Her dyed blonde hair was a mess, and she clutched a handbag as if it were a life preserver. "Victor," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to talk to you. I'm in big trouble." We sat in a quiet corner of the lobby. Diane confessed everything. She wasn't just an HR person. She'd been planted in Veltria by Global Nexus to oversee the firing of veteran employees, including me. She'd taken money from Margaret Hensley to ensure the restructuring went smoothly, and she'd reported my every move to Graham. But now, with Devlin's lawsuit shaking things up, Global Nexus saw her as a threat. They threatened me. Diane said, her eyes red. "They said if I didn't find a way to blame you, they'd destroy my life." "Victor, I don't want to do this, but I'm scared." I looked at her, a mixture of anger and pity. "Diane," I said, "if you want to make things right, tell the truth. Be our witness." She nodded, though she was still shaking. "I will. But you have to protect me." I took Diane to Devlin's legal team, and she agreed to be a witness, providing more emails and recordings of calls between her and Graham, in which he admitted to knowing about Global Nexus's plans. This was the biggest turning point in the case. With Diane's testimony, we could not only expose the hedge fund, but also link them directly to Global Nexus. But it came at the cost of Diane's safety. Lawrence hired a private security firm to protect her, and I began to receive more threatening messages, some even directed at Elaine. One night, while Elaine and I were having dinner, a brick flew through the living room window, accompanied by a note that read, "Stop Hale." Elaine took my hand, determined. "Victor, they want us to be afraid. But you've come this far. Don't let them win." Meanwhile, back in Devlin, the Westbrook project faced a new challenge. A group of hackers, likely hired by Global Nexus, tried to attack our new system, targeting the data of 10,000 apartments. Fortunately, the security layers I had designed, something Graham had once called too complex, stopped the attack. But the incident shook the team, and some of the younger engineers began to question whether we should continue to fight such a formidable foe. I called a meeting of the entire team, stood before them in a conference room, and said, "Guys, I've lost 18 years to people who thought experience wasn't worth it. But we're building something that's not just good, it's the best. If we give up now, we're letting them win. Who's with me?" The room stood up and applauded. Alan, standing in the corner, smiled. "Vic," he said later, "you really know how to inspire." But the next twist came from an unexpected place. One morning, while I was going through Harold's archives, I discovered an old video file recorded at a Bayview Properties board meeting 15 years earlier. In the video, Harold Bay, then in good health, stood before the shareholders talking about the future of the company. He pointed to me sitting in the back row and said, "Victor Hale is the man who will take us into the 21st century. If this company ever forgets his values, that will be the day we fail." I watched the video over and over again, tears streaming down my face. Harold didn't just believe in me. He had predicted it. I decided to make the video public at the upcoming trial, not just to protect my reputation, but to honor Harold's legacy. The trial began on a cold winter day in Rochester. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former Veltria employees, and curious locals. Diane testified, her voice shaking, but determined, detailing the entire Global Nexus plan. Emails from Alan's USB drive, Justin's documents, and Harold's archives were presented, painting a clear picture of a conspiracy that had lasted for years. Graham, sitting at the defense table, looked a shadow of his former self, lacking the confidence he had the day he fired me. But Margaret Hensley, the person we had hoped would appear, but she was absent. Her lawyer claimed she was out of the country for medical reasons. I knew she was hiding, but I also knew the truth had come out. While waiting for the verdict, another event shook things up. Westbrook Properties Now, Devlin's largest client, announced that it wanted to expand its portfolio by 5,000 apartments in Pennsylvania. This was a golden opportunity, but also the biggest challenge yet. I assembled a team working day and night to expand the system, making sure it could handle the new scale without collapsing. During this process, I discovered a young engineer, Sarah, who had worked under Graham at Veltria, who had a special talent for database optimization. I put her in charge of a key part of the project, and she exceeded expectations. "Victor," she said one day, "I used to think you were too conservative with your emphasis on documentation, but now I understand. Thanks for taking a chance on me." I smiled. "Sarah, I don't train engineers. I build leaders." The trial ended in a shocking verdict. The hedge fund was fined hundreds of millions of dollars for fraud, and Global Nexus was placed under federal investigation. Graham and Diane were sentenced to probation, but Margaret Hensley remained in hiding, believed to be in a country without an extradition treaty. The biggest victory, however, was not the fine or the verdict. It was when Harold Bay from Florida called me. "Victor, he said, his voice weak but proud. "You did it. You saved my company in ways I never dreamed." I choked up. "Harold, I just did what you taught me. Build something that will last, but the story remains." Just as I thought my story had reached its climax, with Margaret Hensley's arrest, the Harold Bay Scholarship Fund established, and the successful launch of the Engineering Education Department, I, Victor Hale, was drawn into a new vortex, where the secrets that seemed to have been exposed were just the surface of a larger conspiracy. Friends, if you've stayed with me through the drama of firings, lawsuits, and victories, prepare yourself, because what's about to happen will have you on the edge of your seat. This isn't just a story about an engineer proving his worth. It's about taking on seemingly unstoppable forces. And I promise the twists ahead will have you saying, "How far can this go?" After the Engineering Education Department launch, Rochester was ablaze with pride. Local newspapers from the Democrat and Chronicle to the TV news channels called me a real estate hero, and my story was splashed across X, where older workers shared their underappreciated experiences. But in the glow of the spotlight, I sensed a shadow lurking. Margaret Hensley might have been caught, but I knew Global Nexus, with its network of power that spanned the globe, would not let up easily. And my hunch was soon proven true. One summer evening, as Elaine and I walked along the shore of Lake Ontario, watching the setting sun turn the water a brilliant gold, my phone buzzed. A text message from an anonymous number. "Hensley is a puppet Hale. Stop, or your family will pay." I held Elaine's hand, trying to stay calm. But inside I knew this game had just reached a new level. I called Lawrence, and he summoned security. "Victor," he said, his voice low, "we need to find out who's behind Hensley. The FBI says they suspect Global Nexus is part of a larger organization, but they don't have enough evidence." I nodded, but in my head, I started to put the pieces together. If Hensley wasn't the mastermind, then who was? And why were they still targeting me, an engineer from Rochester? The next morning, I arrived at Devlin's office early, determined to dig deeper into Harold's data. Sarah, now the technical lead, joined me, and we discovered a hidden file on Harold's hard drive, encrypted with an algorithm I'd never seen before. After hours of work, Sarah, with her incredible talent, cracked the code. Inside was a document called Project Titan, a detailed plan by a secret organization called the Vanguard Society to control the global real estate market through the manipulation of companies like Veltria and Global Nexus. The document listed the members of the society, and one name caught me off guard: Edward Grayson, a Manhattan real estate billionaire who was a generous philanthropist and a close friend of many American politicians. Grayson, according to the document, was the head of the Vanguard Society, and Margaret Hensley was just one of his managers. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling as if my world were falling apart. Edward Grayson wasn't just a name in the papers. He had appeared at a real estate conference in Rochester 10 years earlier, where I'd met him briefly. He'd praised the system. Me saying it sets a new standard. Now I realized he wasn't just interested in the technology, he was assessing me to see if I was a threat to his plans. I passed the documents on to the legal team and the FBI, but Clara Monroe. Harold's lawyer warned me Victor Grayson is not like Hensley. He has the political power and the money to make anyone disappear. If you continue, you're putting Devlin at risk. But the drama didn't stop there. One afternoon, while I was meeting with my engineering team about expanding the system for a new client in Ohio, a security guard ran in his face ashen. "Mr. Hale, there's a package in the lobby addressed to you, but it's ticking." The conference room fell silent. I ordered the building evacuated, and the Rochester bomb squad was called in. Fortunately, the device in the package was just an old alarm clock with a note attached. "Your time is up, Hale." The police concluded that this was a cruel joke, but I knew better. This was a message from the Vanguard, and they were playing mind games to scare me. Elaine, hearing about the incident, insisted that I back off. "Victor," she said, her eyes red, "I'm proud of what you've done. but I can't lose you." I hugged her, promising to be more careful. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop. Harold had trusted me. Alan had been attacked because of me, and hundreds of Devlin employees were relying on me. I decided to beef up the family's security and asked Lawrence to hire a team of private investigators to follow Grayson. The next twist came from an unexpected source. One morning, while I was checking my email, I received a message from an anonymous account containing an audio file. I opened the file, and Justin Bay's voice rang out, trembling. "Victor, if you can hear this, it means I'm in trouble. I've been under surveillance since I gave you my mother's diary. I found something else, a contract between Grayson and my father, from before the sale of Bayview Properties. Grayson wanted to buy the company, but my father refused and he was threatened. I'm sending it to you. Please, be careful." The attachment was a scanned copy of the contract in which Grayson promised Harold a huge sum of money to buy Bayview, on the condition that Harold fire me. Harold tore up the contract, but Grayson didn't forget. I tried to contact Justin, but his phone was unreachable. Worried, I called Clara, and she confirmed that Justin had disappeared from Rochester 2 days ago. "Victor," she said, "I'm afraid the Vanguard has captured him to send a message." I felt a surge of guilt. Justin had risked everything to help me, and now he might be in danger. I contacted the FBI, provided the audio file and the contract, and they launched an urgent investigation to find Justin. Meanwhile, Sarah and I continued to analyze the data from Project Titan, discovering that the Vanguard was after more than just real estate. They were using data from systems like Veltria's to manipulate the stock market, predict rental trends, and even influence local elections. My personal drama was compounded when Alan, after recovering, returned to work with a new discovery. He found a hidden piece of code in Veltria's old system, installed years ago, that allowed someone to gain remote access to customer data. Victor Allen said this code isn't yours. It was added by someone with high-level administrative privileges, probably Diane. I was stunned. Diane, despite her testimony, might still be keeping a secret from us. I confronted her over a secure video call, and she admitted, her voice shaking. "I had no choice, Victor. Grayson forced me to install it to spy on Veltria's customers. I think it was disabled when you left. I was furious, but I also knew Diane was Grayson's victim. I demanded every detail about the code, and Sarah used that information to patch the vulnerability, preventing any future attacks. But the biggest twist came late one night, when I received a call from an international number. The voice on the other end was deep and familiar. "Victor, it's me, Justin." I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Justin, where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm hiding in Mexico," he whispered. "The Vanguard captured me. But I escaped, thanks to an insider, Vickers. I have what you need: a list of other Vanguard members, including those in the U.S. government." I asked Justin to send the data over a secure channel, and the next morning I received an encrypted file containing the names of senators, mayors, and CEOs, all linked to Grayson. It was the biggest bomb yet, enough to topple not only the Vanguard, but the entire system of power they had built. I passed the list on to the FBI, and they coordinated with Interpol to launch an international investigation. Meanwhile, in Devlin, we faced a new challenge. A group of G, allegedly linked to Grayson, was trying to pressure him into selling the company to a competitor. Lawrence and I called an emergency board meeting, where I laid out the whole story from the firings to Global Nexus, and now the Vanguard Society. "Gentlemen," I said, "Devlin is more than just a company. It's proof that we can build something right, something that lasts. If we sell now, we're letting Grayson win." The board, moved by the story and the evidence, voted to keep the company, and Grayson's shareholders were eliminated. But the drama wasn't over. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a lecture in the technical education department, Clara Monroe walked in with shocking news. "Victor, Edward Grayson has just turned himself in to the FBI. He says he'll tell you everything in exchange for leniency, and he wants to see you before he goes to trial. I was stunned. Meet Grayson, the man who tried to destroy me. Harold and everything I had built, I agreed, but only if the meeting took place under FBI surveillance. The meeting took place in a Manhattan office with Grayson sitting across from me, looking much older than his glossy press image. "Victor," he said, his voice hoarse, "I was wrong to underestimate you. Your system, it was so perfect, it destroyed my plans." I looked him straight in the eye. "Grayson, I didn't build the system to destroy anyone. I built it to help others. Your mistake was thinking that money could buy everything." He bowed, and I left the room feeling like a chapter had finally been closed. Grayson's trial became the biggest media event of the year, with a series of revelations about the Vanguard Foundation shaking up American politics and business. Devlin, thanks to my team and my perseverance, became the leading property management company not only in the Northeast but in the country. The Harold Bay Scholarship Fund awards scholarships to dozens of young engineers each year, and my book, Building to Last, has become a bestseller, inspiring millions of older workers. Now, as I sit on my porch looking out over sparkling Lake Ontario, I think about my journey from laid-off engineer to Rochester hero, to author, educator, and motivator. I accepted Jeffrey Westbrook's invitation to join the board, but on one condition: Devlin would fund a free training program for older workers, helping them compete in the tech world. Elaine, who was always by my side, smiled as I told her about the plan. "Victor," she said, "you don't just build systems, you build a legacy. My friends, this story is proof that no one can take away your value, no matter how powerful they are. Stay with me, because I promise there are more surprises, more triumphs, and more dramas ahead. Share your stories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The end. One afternoon, as I was preparing for the launch of the Technical Education Department, Justin Bay came into the office. "Victor," he said, "I have a proposition. My father wants to give you 10 of his shares in Devlin as a thank you, but there is one condition. You must agree to write a book about this story so that future generations will know the value of the experience." I was stunned. A book? I had never thought of myself as a writer. But as I looked out over Lake Ontario, thinking about my journey, I realized that this was the way to keep my story alive. I was still weighing Jeffrey Westbrook's invitation and Harold's offer. Every day, I drive along the lakeside road, watch the waves crash, and think about what's next. But one thing I know for sure: I will never let anyone tell me that my experience, or yours, is worthless. Friends, stay with me, because I promise there's more drama, more surprises, and more victories ahead. Share in the comments if you've ever had to fight to prove your worth. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because this story is still ongoing. Thinking that the victory in court and the offer from Harold Bay were the culmination of the story. I, Victor Hale, was once again drawn into a new drama, deeper, darker, and filled with secrets that left both me and everyone else following this story gasping for air. Folks, if you thought the story of a fired engineer was over, brace yourself, because what's about to happen next will keep you glued to your screens. This isn't just a story about justice. It's about facing seemingly unbeatable forces, and I promise the twists ahead will have you saying, "No way." After the court's ruling, Rochester exploded. The coffee shops along Lake Ontario, where older folks used to gather to sip coffee and read the paper, were filled with stories about Victor Hale, the man who took down the real estate giant. On X posts about I was shared thousands of times with comments like, "This is why you should never underestimate the veteran worker," and Victor is a symbol of those who have been trampled by the system. I felt proud, but also worried. I knew that Global Nexus, though wounded, was not yet broken. Margaret Hensley, the leader of the Snakes, was still lurking somewhere, and I had a feeling she was preparing a counterattack. One winter morning, As snow covered the streets of Rochester, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was cold, almost emotionless. "Mr. Hale, I advise you to withdraw everything. Margaret says hello." Before I could reply, the call was disconnected. I stood there in my office overlooking frozen Lake Ontario, my heart pounding. This was no ordinary threat. This was a warning from someone who knew who I was, who knew my family. I called Lawrence and he summoned the security team. "Victor," he said, "we need to beef up protection for you and Elaine. Global Nexus is no joke." I nodded, but inside I knew that retreat was not an option. I had gone too far, and it was time to play this game to the end. Meanwhile, at Devlin, we faced a new crisis. The management system for the 5,000 new apartments in Pennsylvania, part of Westbrook's expansion, began to fail. Not a major one, but enough to slow down the processing of maintenance requests, causing some customers to complain. Sarah, a promising young engineer, and I worked day and night to find the cause. After 3 sleepless days, we discovered the problem: a subtle code change in the core of the system, inserted through a software update from a third-party vendor. This wasn't an accident. Sarah said, her eyes widening. Someone deliberately sabotaged it. A chill ran down my spine. Global Nexus. Or another enemy from Veltria's past. I asked Alan to check the logs, and he found a trace to an IP address in the Cayman Islands, a match for one of the shell companies we'd discovered in Harold's files. I reported the incident to Lawrence, and he hired a team of cybersecurity experts to track it down. Meanwhile, I decided to go public with my team. In a conference room meeting with Lake Ontario, white outside the windows, I stood before the engineers and said, "We're under attack, not just from the outside, but from people who want to destroy what we built. But I believe in you, and I believe in this system. We'll fix it, and we'll be stronger than ever." Sarah stood up, her voice firm. "Victor, we're with you." The room applauded, and I felt a sense of unity I hadn't felt since my early days at Bayview Properties. But the real drama began when a new character entered the story. One afternoon, as I was reviewing Harold's archives, a woman walked into Devlin's office introducing herself as Clara Monroe. She was in her 60s, with silver hair, a smart suit, and a piercing gaze. "Mr. Hale," she said, handing over a business card. "I'm Harold Bay's attorney, and I have something you need to see." Clara handed me a small hard drive encrypted with a password only Harold knew. "Harold wanted you to have this before he died," she said, her voice low. I was stunned. "Dead Harold?" Clara nodded. "He died last week in Florida. He told me to find you, saying you were the only one who could finish what he started." I could hardly believe it. Harold, who had believed in me from the start, who had predicted Veltria's mistake, was gone. I felt a void inside, but also more determined than ever. That evening, at home, Elaine and I opened the hard drive with the password Clara had given us, Harold's birthday. Inside was a huge trove of documents, not just about Veltria, but about the entire Global Nexus network. There were secret contracts, recordings of meetings, and even lists of local politicians who had been bribed by Global Nexus to facilitate real estate acquisitions. One particular recording left me cold. Margaret Hensley's voice, ordering Graham Vickers to eliminate Victor Hale at all costs, even if it meant discrediting him. She even suggested hiring hackers to break into Devlin's system if I didn't back down. I took the hard drive to the legal team and they almost jumped up. Victor, the lead attorney, said this isn't just evidence for our case. This is the key to taking down Global Nexus altogether. But Clara warned me, Margaret Hensley is not an easy person to deal with. She has a network of spies and the money to buy anyone. You need to be careful, because she knows you have this hard drive. I nodded, but deep down I knew I couldn't back down. Harold had entrusted me with his legacy, and I wasn't going to let him down. The next twist came late one night, when I received an email from an anonymous contact containing a video. The video was taken in a dark parking lot in Rochester, where Graham Vickers, looking haggard and distraught, told an unseen person, "I did everything she asked. I fired Hale. I hacked the system. But now she wants me gone." The other person, in a cold female voice, replied, "Graham, you know too much. Leave the country, or you won't stand a chance." I recognized the voice immediately. Margaret Hensley. The video ended with Graham running away, and I sat there, my hands shaking. This was irrefutable evidence that Margaret was not only behind my firing, but was ready to eliminate anyone who got in her way. I forwarded the video to my legal team and the FBI, as the case had now moved beyond a corporate lawsuit. Meanwhile, in Devlin, we fixed the Pennsylvania system, and the Westbrook project made headlines in real estate magazines with the headline, "Devlin Systems, the unbeatable property management system." But the joy was short-lived. One morning, when I arrived at the office, I found Sarah standing in the door, her face white. "Victor," she said, "Alan, he was attacked last night." My blood ran cold. Alan, my loyal friend, the one who had found the USB and stood by me through all the drama, was now in the hospital, beaten unconscious in a nearby parking lot. The police said it was a robbery, but I knew better. This was Margaret's revenge. I rushed to the hospital, where I found Alan, his face bruised, but his spirit still indomitable. "Vic," he whispered, "don't let them win." I found something before the attack, on Harold's hard drive. He handed me a piece of paper with a string of characters, a password to another hidden file. That evening, I opened the file, and inside was a map of Global Nexus's real estate transactions, linking them to transnational criminal organizations. I realized that Margaret Hensley was more than just a greedy businesswoman. She was part of a larger criminal network, and Veltria was just one of hundreds of companies she had manipulated. I turned the information over to the FBI, and they launched a full-scale investigation. But my personal drama wasn't over. One afternoon, as I was preparing for my technical education department's launch, Justin Bay came into the office with shocking news. "Victor," he said, "I just discovered that my mother, who used to be my father's secretary at Bayview Properties, kept a diary. She recorded everything, including secret meetings between Harold and Margaret Hensley from 20 years ago." I flipped through the diary, and my heart nearly stopped. It turned out that Margaret had tried to buy Bayview Properties before the investment fund came along, but Harold had refused. She had vowed to destroy him, and firing me was part of a decades-long revenge plot. The diary, along with all the other evidence, was presented to the court in a supplemental hearing. Meanwhile, I got a call from Clara Monroe, Harold's lawyer. "Victor," she said, "Margaret Hensley has just been arrested in Switzerland. Interpol has been tracking her since you turned over the data to the FBI. She is being extradited to the United States." I breathed a sigh of relief, but I also knew that this victory had come at a cost. Elaine, who had always been my rock, began to worry about our safety. "Victor," she said one evening as we sat on the porch overlooking Lake Ontario, "you've done enough. Maybe it's time to take a break." I took her hand. "Elaine, I promise after the education division launches we'll go on vacation, maybe Florida like Harold." The launch of the engineering education division took place on a bright spring day in Rochester. Hundreds of young engineers and real estate professionals attended, and I stood on stage and told my story from the day I was fired to the fight with Global Nexus to Harold's legacy. When I finished, the entire room stood and applauded. Sarah, now the engineering team leader, stepped up and handed me a plaque engraved with the words, "Victor Hale, Builder of Lasting Systems." I choked up thinking of Harold, of Allen, of all the people who had stood by me. But the story wasn't over. A week later, I got a letter from a major New York publisher offering to sponsor a book Justin had proposed. They wanted me to tell not only my story, but also how the tech industry could learn from Veltria's mistakes. I agreed, but on one condition, that a portion of the profits would go to establish a Harold Bay scholarship for young engineers from Rochester. Now, as I sit here writing these words for the book, I look out at Lake Ontario, where the water sparkles in the summer sun. I have not yet responded to Jeffrey Westbrook's invitation, but I know that whichever path I choose I will continue to build, not just systems, but legacies. My friends, this story is proof that experience, perseverance, and honesty will always win no matter how strong the enemy. Stay with me, because I promise there are more surprises ahead. Share your stories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. As I stood on the shores of Lake Ontario, watching the waves sparkle in the summer sun, I, Victor Hale, thought I had come to the end of my journey. From an engineer fired for being too expensive, I fought through the dark machinations of Veltria Global Nexus and the Vanguard Society, and faced off against powerful figures like Margaret Hensley and Edward Grayson. I saved Devlin, built a legacy with the Harold Bay Scholarship, and inspired others with my book, Building to Last. But my story, my friends, did not end with victory over my enemies or the glory of success. It ended with a quiet moment, where I realized that true value lies not in defeating anyone, but in building something that will last. For myself, for my family, and for those who will come after me. After Grayson's trial, Rochester was no longer the quiet little town I had known. It became a symbol of resilience, a place where ordinary working people stood up to giants. The lakeside cafes where older people gathered were filled with stories of Victor Hale, the man who changed real estate. But I didn't want to be just a symbol. I wanted to leave something real, something tangible. So, I spent the last months of T5 perfecting a free training program for older workers in Devlin, which I called the Harold Bay Legacy. The program would not only teach them technical skills, but also instill in them the belief that age is no barrier, that experience is the most valuable asset. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves fell along the Lake Ontario Road, I received a call from Justin Bay. He had returned to Rochester after escaping the Vanguard Society, and was now living a quieter life as a consultant to small companies. "Victor," he said, his voice warm, "I've just read your book. My father would be proud. But there's something I want you to know. My mother, before she died, left you a letter." I was stunned. Justin's mother, who had been Harold's secretary, was a silent part of this story, and I never thought she would have anything to say to me. Justin mailed the letter, and when I opened it, I felt tears well up in my eyes. The handwritten letter, written in shaky but heartfelt handwriting, read, "Victor, you were the person Harold trusted the most. When you were fired, I knew the company had lost its soul. I kept the diary to protect you so that one day the truth would come out. Thank you for not giving up. Keep building just like Harold wanted." The letter ended with the line, "Come visit our old house in Rochester. There's something waiting for you." I drove to the Bay's old house, a small wooden house on a quiet street that had been converted into a community center. Justin met me there, leading me into a small room where a wooden box was placed on a table. "My mother told me to keep this for you," he said. I opened the box, and inside was a final backup of the Bayview property system. Not just the source code I had written, but Harold's personal notes, where he described me as the man who will change the way the world works. Along with it was a small badge engraved with the words, "Bayview Properties, the builder of the future." I held the badge tightly, feeling as if Harold were there smiling down at me. The final twist came one cold winter day when I was invited to an event in New York, where my book was honored as Inspirational Book of the Year. At the ceremony, I was surprised to see Jeffrey Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Properties, take the stage. Not only did he present the award, but he also announced that Westbrook would sponsor a national network of Devlin's training program, bringing it to every major city in America. "Victor Hale," he said, looking straight at me, "taught us that value is not in the cost, but in what you leave behind for the world." The audience stood up and applauded, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was not just an engineer, but a game changer. But the most meaningful moment didn't happen on stage. It happened later, when Elaine and I were driving back to Rochester along the Lake Ontario Road. We stopped at a small dock where Harold had taken me fishing years ago. As the sun set, Elaine took my hand and said, "Victor, you did it. Not just for you, but for all of us." I looked at her, the woman who had been with me through every drama, every threat, every triumph, and I realized that she was the reason I never gave up. "Elaine," I said, "we're going to Florida like I promised. But first, I want to build something else, a future where no one is underestimated because of age or experience." The lesson for you: never let anyone tell you that you're not valuable enough. Experience. Your courage, your perseverance, and your integrity are things that no one can take away from you. If you get pushed off your path, get up, find a new path, and build something better. I did it, not by seeking revenge, but by proving that good work done right always wins. My story is not about defeating Veltria, Global Nexus, or the Vanguard. It's about building a legacy for Harold, for Elaine, for Alan, for Sarah, and for all of you watching this video. Thank you guys for sticking with me through this long journey. If you've ever been underestimated or had to fight to prove your worth, please share your story in the comments. I read every comment, and I want to hear about your victories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because I'll continue to share inspiring stories, lessons from Rochester, and moments that make you believe that anything is possible. See you in the next video. And remember, you are always valuable, and you can always rebuild.